Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Sound Advice, The Law Matters. I am your host, David Tawil from Bud Larner, a law firm in Short Hills. I'm usually joined here tonight with my co-partner in crime, Carolina Denhart, also co-counsel and counsel with the law firm of Bud Larner, but unfortunately Carolina is still a little under the weather, so she could not make it tonight. Like it or not, you're stuck with me for the next hour. But not necessarily just with me, because I am pleased to have in the studio tonight Stanley Louissaint of Fluid Designs. Stanley, say hi.
Hello, everybody.
And we brought Stanley in to speak to you tonight because Stanley does not just web design and IT work and general digital work of the sort that frankly befuddles me, but more importantly, Stanley is involved with a lot of computer forensics work, which as divorce lawyers, we utilize and have been utilizing on a greater and greater basis as time goes on, as the internet proliferates, as social media expands and integrates itself into our world. We as matrimonial attorneys have noticed the need for having good digital forensic people in our Rolodex and be able to call upon them literally sometimes in the case of domestic violence at a moment's notice to jump in and help us help our clients. So for that, Stanley, again, welcome to the show. Stanley, let me ask you a question. Digital forensics. It sounds like a mouthful, but how'd you fall into this idea, this concept?
So from my standpoint, I was dealing with law firms predominantly on the IT consulting design side of things, right? So as we were handling our clients and maintaining their computer systems on a day-to-day basis, different things started to happen in their cases where they needed an expert, right? And the biggest thing in this industry, as far as I'm concerned, is trust. So they already knew us. We were already handling things for them. And then the credentialing was already there. So I stepped in and filled in that role on the cases that these clients had that were going on. Predominantly at the time, they were criminal cases, so people's lives were literally on the line.
What type of computer work, forensic work, did you get into, at least initially, on a criminal side?
So initially, it was actually e-discovery work. Okay. And the reason was guys would get hard drives from the government with tons of data on it and not know what to do with it. Right.
How to find out what's hidden, how to find out where all the files are. For our listeners, e-discovery is electronic discovery, which has taken a bigger and bigger role in many litigation cases from a legal perspective. Instead of the age-old concept of lawyers delivering to other lawyers boxes and boxes of material, you get a FedEx envelope with a flash drive, or maybe 2 flash drives, or 3 hard drives. And that constitutes their discovery production. Now, again, as lawyers, we like paper. We don't like zeros and ones. So that's why we have need for people like Stanley to sit there and say, what the heck is all this stuff?
And you're right. So the big thing is getting people who are used to using paper, right, or seeing things, physically in front of them on a digital screen. But once we were able to show these guys how we were able to put the data into what we call a review platform, which allows you to do all your work, being able to search through it, cull the data down, and pull out what's relevant, they realize not only is this more efficient, but I feel like I'm a better lawyer for it because at the same time, I'm utilizing the tools that are available to find exactly what I need. So that's really was the introduction to us providing, I guess I can say, ancillary services at the time to attorneys, right, who were our clients, where their clients became our clients.
That's pretty cool. And as part of it, I guess you continued with your staff to also engage in what I'll call the regular IT work, the work that you guys did to build the websites, to do the hosting, to set up the servers, and troubleshoot when somebody's mouse wasn't working.
Correct. So, I mean, that was the crux of the business, right? And I always say we would have never gotten the other stuff if we weren't their IT guy first, because they already had the familiarity with us. So, having to listen to 20 vendors come in and try to sell themselves, we didn't necessarily have to do that because we've already had the trust of our clients from the start. Plus, we knew their systems. So it actually allowed us to even help them save money with some of the e-discovery stuff because we were using the systems that we had already implemented, from the start.
Makes it more efficient.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about what we hear in the news these days, what we see as far as how digital life impacts our entire world. We talk a lot about the digital footprint, somebody's quote unquote digital footprint. What is your perception as a IT / computer forensics guy? What's my digital footprint?
Well, the simplest digital footprint is literally putting your name in Google, right?
Okay.
So, and I say that because
who here hasn't Googled themselves at least once a week?
Yes, or anyone that you meet, right? So, my thing is,
I see Mike, our tech guy over here, who's Googling his name as we speak.
So that's the first thing is whatever you can find that a search engine can find about you, that stuff is public. Right? I mean, Google's got your address, your address is on there, your date of birth is on there. Anything that would be considered public record that people would normally have to go down to City Hall or somewhere else to pick up, you literally can get online. I can find out how much you paid for your house, all right? So that is too much. Zillow would tell me if that's true or not. But seriously, that's the start of your digital footprint, right? That's the stuff that's technically easily accessible that anybody can just do a search and find.
Which is, in our role as divorce lawyers, when somebody walks into my office and they retain my services and they say, my spouse is doing something or another with John Smith or Jane Doe, first thing I do, I hit Google. We hit Facebook. We look at whatever social media is available to us to say, okay, who is this person? And you're right, because it gives us the opportunity to see what's in the public arena and to try to gather whatever information that we can gather before anybody's aware that, somebody's looking. And that's, from what you're saying, everything's in the public arena. It's all completely legal, and we know that. And the question then becomes, let me ask you, we hear ads on the radio and print for all these companies that I'm not going to name any companies, of course. You have a bad review, you have bad information. We will fix it. We will take it away. We will. So what's the premise? How does that work? Does somebody come in and literally just overwrite a page or? So
that's the interesting thing. And I've seen this more often than not, especially dealing with the criminal attorneys. And I'm going to tell you why. When you have a charge, right, you're not found guilty yet. You just got a charge, right? It could be the craziest thing you ever heard or the smallest thing, right? A lot of that stuff ends up online, right? Some little local newspaper gets it and it gets pushed. Now your reputation is on the line, right? And what people have done is they've hired these companies, like you're saying, to literally increase their reputation. Now, whether it's you personally, whether it's your business, what these guys all do is they put good content on top to push the bad content down. There's no deleting it, Let's say
it's there. It's
there, right? It doesn't mean it can't be found. But what they try to do is crowd it out by putting better stuff on top. So if you're not interesting and you don't have any content to add. I'm
not interesting, trust me.
You don't have any content to add. It's going to be a harder feat than if you're somebody who's always doing something, writing blogs, or people are talking about you, whatever the case is. Me being here right now, right? This is eventually going to be on the internet.
Yes,
right?
It will.
Along with all my other positive stuff that you guys can Google about me. But no.
Well, the show will be available by way of podcast once it has aired. The WMTR will be putting it up on Sound Advice, the Law Matters webpage. And of course, this will be forever, better or worse, forever memorialized in the digital world.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And digital stuff, digital data, sorry, not stuff. Digital data only grows, right? The amount of new data that's generated every single day is just, I think the amount of data we generate every single day now is more than everything that we've had combined, like some crazy stat
exponential growth.
Yeah. And it just is what it is, right?
So what you're saying is we will never hear that electronic voice that says, you have seen all there is to see on the internet. Please check back later.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
So speaking of social media, speaking of the proliferation and the expansion of how all this works. Now, as divorce lawyers, as I said earlier, one of the first things we do if we find out that there's infidelity or something of the sort going on is we'll try to search out who the significant others are and what they may be doing. Now, as a point of reference, in the law of the state of New Jersey, we are what we call a no-fault state. That means that a marriage can fail for every reason or it can fail for no reason. What you are doing, or what a married couple is doing in the privacy of their bedroom, or what somebody may be doing as far as an infidelity, in the eyes of the court doesn't matter, except if it does. And it seems a little counterintuitive to say it that way, but there have been Supreme Court cases, including this one case called Manny versus Manny, where the Supreme Court basically says, we don't care why the marriage fails. It failed. Because if we're going to start looking at fault, then, well, okay, she slept with somebody else, but he pushed her into sleeping with somebody else because they weren't happy. It becomes too cumbersome. So the court says, we don't care why it failed, except and unless the reasons why the affair, I'll use the word affair in air quotes, happened is so egregious that it makes us have to stand up and take notice. So, for example, regular couple having an affair, court says no big deal. That regardless of sex, by the way, in this day and age, it doesn't matter if it's a same-sex affair, heterosexual, homosexual affair, irrelevant. You have somebody having sex with a horse. All right, now the meter's starting to rise. But where it really gets interesting is where the person's having sex with a horse and they're buying the horse a Tiffany-studded bridle, and they're spending all sorts of marital income and money on this extramarital affair. That's when the court says, whoa. Wow, actually, that was pretty funny. No pun intended. That's where the court says, hold on, let's take a look and see how the other spouse has been hurt from an economic standpoint as a result of the offending party's conduct. Now, from a digital perspective, from a social media perspective, I go out, I'm at some place, the picture gets taken. So-and-so was at such and such with this person. I believe the term is geotagging.
Yes.
Okay. Talk to me how your work at Fluid Designs can help us find, person A was with person B at location C.
Okay, so now, once again, let's go back to the social media world, right? Because that's where most of this stuff happens. So in the social media world, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, different platforms, you can either be Twitter, you can be private or you can be public, right? There's two different worlds. So let's just go into that real quick. So if somebody is private, what that means is before you can see their stuff that they post, you have to be their friend, okay? You have to make a request. They have to accept it.
Right.
In the public space, doesn't matter who you are. You can see anything and everything that they post. Now, depending on which platform, like Facebook, certain things are always public. A profile picture, right? Which is that main picture you see when you go to someone's page.
Right.
So in your case, right, if that
I hope
person
you haven't looked me up.
right? If that person has a picture of them and that horse wearing that wearing that bridle, right? I mean, there's the answer to your question. But if something is, so from my standpoint, when I'm actually doing some of this work, I can't go and request somebody as a friend, right?
Right.
Because I'm acting as on behalf of you, right? Essentially, right? If I'm retained by you, and that's a big no-no.
I've actually seen cases that have come across the Law Journal. I think there was one about 2 years ago where a paralegal, acting on the advice of her boss, friended somebody who was a defendant in a personal injury matter. And the reason why they did that was they wanted to go into the defendant's Facebook page and see pictures of them water skiing and horseback riding and all sorts of fun stuff. And they actually were successful because they sent the friend request. The defendant accepted it, not knowing who the hell this person was. And they got all this great information. It was a good idea from a legal perspective, except a bad idea from an ethical perspective. Both the paralegal and the attorney got into a lot of trouble for this on the basis of deception.
Correct.
So that's the type, exactly like you're saying, Stanley. We wouldn't, as an attorney, I would never say to you, hey, go, lurk on John Doe's page and send them a friend request. They won't know who you are. They've accepted everybody else. And once you're in, get me the dirt. It's not something we would ever recommend.
And that's the thing, right? There's always a line in the sand for everything. But here's an example. Your client, who we're both working for, essentially, if they're still friends with that person guess what?
They can give you their login information, and you can go in and have fun.
Exactly. Unless that person goes and defriends them, we can do that. So the reason I brought that up is it's very important to notice that in different on different social media platforms, the mechanisms are different based on what's available to you or not, whether a person is public or private. Now let's move to the new age, right? Snapchat, is one of the things where you send somebody a video, it can last for 10 seconds, a picture, and then it disappears. The video can last until the video runs out, which they allow you to record up to 10 seconds and it goes away. You can add something to your story. Something on your story lasts up to 24 hours, and then it automatically disappears. Now, you cannot look at anyone's Snapchat unless you actually add them as a friend. There is no public version of looking at someone's Snapchat profile.
So if somebody was engaged in nefarious activities, that would seem to be a nice way to get around it of, look, you and I are friends and we're going to do whatever we're going to do, sexting or talking or discussing our illicit affair, and we'll keep it all on Snapchat and nobody can get it.
Correct.
Now, can nobody get it?
Well, it's all about how good.
Wink, wink, nod, nod.
No, look, there's other things though, right? So we get into the point of an investigation where it's like, okay, it's time to subpoena the guy's cell phone, right? Where you guys, put that stuff in and they got to hand over a digital footprint or a digital image of that particular phone. We can go in and do those searches.
But you just said 30 seconds ago, the Snapchat is there for 10 seconds or 24 hours and then it's gone. Are you saying it's not?
It's gone if they didn't save it. You have an option to save. So if I send you something, before I send it to you, I can actually save it to my phone. But what it will give us is, unless they clear the conversation, I can actually see that two people were actually communicating. And you actually, in Snapchat itself, when you're communicating, some people like to save messages like it's a text message. If you click and hold on a text in Snapchat, it will save it until the person that clicked and held it let it go. So if I'm talking to you,
right,
and you saved something that I sent, there's nothing I can do to get rid of it until you decide to get rid of it.
I'm glad I don't have Snapchat. This has now affirmed the fact that I am never going to get it. But, you talk about these types of things where and we're going to talk more about actually going through somebody's phone in the next segment. But talking about an actual case, and I'll give you a funny example. You say, Facebook's accessible and Instagram's accessible. We had a case where the two people were engaging in their communications, and they came up with a very novel idea. They said, let's start a Words with Friends game. Words with Friends, as many people know, has that little chat feature. Mm-hmm. They would play one word every 10 days just so that the damn game didn't go away. And they carried on their conversation in this chat. And when the game was over, the chat was gone. Now, from what I've seen, if you continue games with various people, they will keep your chat history. So I guess this was prior versions of it. But it ultimately was something that we discovered in the context of doing the divorce case, that this is how this gentleman and this woman were communicating. And sure enough, we got copies of everything. And it was quite enlightening because they were not discussing words of the dictionary. But it's very, very important for you to express that to our listeners so that they can understand that, the biggest thing that I think everybody has to recognize when it comes to digital work and social media is everything is forever. The concept of nothing is forever except for a diamond, that's baloney. Digital data, what you put out in the public sphere is forever. So you hear people all the times when they're talking about job coaching and they're talking about, you're finishing up your college career and you're going to start having to get a real position and a real job. And, maybe it's time that you change your email address from, drunken frat guy 62 to something a little more professional. That's all well and good because you start a new Gmail account and then the other one's gone. But they don't necessarily remember to sanitize and to go back. Go ahead.
And you're right, because I have friends that are in HR, and don't get it twisted. These guys do a search. And there was something, I don't know if it came out that you can't do this now, but there was something that came out where people were literally searching job candidates online beforehand and finding out, like, we're not even going to call this person in based on what we see about them. You know, the resume looks good, sounds good, everything was good on paper. Then they find their online profile, right? Their online persona, we can call it. And it's a whole different person, right? It's a whole different person.
I do recall seeing maybe 2 weeks ago that a case or a decision had come down in the employment law arena where some company had been asking applicants, maybe not on the first go-round, but on the second or third go-round, they had asked them for their social media information, their logins and their passwords, almost so that they could actually go in. And my recollection was that the courts has basically said, you're going a little too far with that. If you want to get something in the general public sphere, have fun. But compelling people to turn over their passwords just to get a job was a little too far.
Was that a private or public company?
I honestly don't remember.
I could tell you, I won't say which state agency, but there are some state agencies that do that.
Okay, then. And moving on. Well, you know, one of the other things that we do as divorce and matrimonial attorneys is we handle, unfortunately, domestic violence. And a lot of domestic violence, which was a case study of laws that came about as a result of a lot of violence against women and culminated in the Domestic Violence Act. And as part of it, it brought criminal penalties and civil penalties to certain criminal actions to prevent the proliferation of various forms of harassment, abuse that were being fostered upon a segment of society. And by and large, and the laws have helped, it has been, domestic violence has been and remains a big problem in society. One of the things that is a course of conduct that is prohibited under the Domestic Violence Act is harassment. So what we have seen and has, as time goes on, the concept of calling the house 20 times but not leaving a message has translated to calling the cell phone 50 times, sending 100 texts, or, you know, flooding a Facebook page, right? What we used to call writing on the wall forever and ever and ever. And as the technology and as social media has evolved, the case law has been forced to evolve. I know you and I had been speaking offline. We had talked about how you were brought in recently on a domestic violence case to address an issue of harassment. So I wanted to ask you to share your experience in that aspect.
Yeah, in that particular incident, you know, there was something going back and forth between the two parties, and you know, essentially, we needed to recover some data, okay, from the cell phone, because person was done with the other person, said, you know what, it's over, and then realized later on that, you know, maybe it wasn't as clean cut as they thought. So what ended up happening was, you know, once again, right, what's gone is not really gone. We were able to recover about 1,200 pages worth of text messages between those two parties.
1,200 pages.
It was a year's worth of conversations that this person thought was gone. They deleted it. You know, they were over and done with it, and said, you know, I've moved on, you know, and
delete contact and be done.
Delete contact, delete, you know, message history, and we're good to go. And it ended up where we were actually able to recover that, and then obviously help affirm some of the suspicions that their counsel had in regards to what was going on. And what's interesting is, and it's funny you said it before in terms of, I had someone always say to me, if you put something online or you put something in text, you got to just pretend like it's on the front page of the New York Times.
Right.
Right. At any point in time,
that can come back and bite you in the butt.
It can come back and bite you.
Now, I remember reading something, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, which I ask you to correct me if I'm wrong, that when it comes to the text messages versus iMessages, the blue bubble versus the green bubble, that it is a distinction with a difference from a, I guess, deletion and recovery perspective. And am I right? Am I wrong?
Well, this is what it is, right? So One of them goes through your cell phone tower as a text message, right? Which your cell phone carrier gets the message and then they take it and then they distribute it to the person on the receiving end, right? That's a text message, SMS. And then an iMessage is purely data. Okay, your cell phone company never knows that message goes between you and the other party. So an iMessage is equivalent to WhatsApp, Viber, BlackBerry Messenger, right? Signal, right? In terms of this stuff is going over the data network, and your cell phone provider never even knows that this communication happens between you and the other party.
What about recovery of an SMS versus a?
I'm not going to say recovery is necessarily different in regards to that, because it's all based on if that segment has been deleted or not from the actual device. So recoverability could still be the same success rate.
But for an iMessage, it's not something that somebody could subpoena Verizon and say, give us a list of all the text messages that went back and forth.
No, and in essence, Verizon, I was telling you the other day offline, right, that Verizon pretty much has more text than anybody else. But most people won't have content of text messages, most cell phone carriers. They'll have a record of communication, meaning this person texts this person, but not content, not what's in there.
That's good to know. When we come back, Stanley, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to leave you with a little bit of homework in our break. We love telling war stories here. So, and I appreciate the one about the domestic violence case. I want you to tell me the craziest forensic work story that you have come up with so far in your career. And we're going to relay it to our listeners when we come back. For our listeners, this is Sound Advice, The Law Matters. I am David Tawil from Bud Larner in Short Hills, here with Stanley Louissaint of Fluid Designs, and we will be back right after these few messages. Thank you. Welcome back to Sound Advice, The Law Matters. I am your host, David Tawil from the Law Office of Bud Larner in Short Hills, New Jersey. Usually, my co-host and partner in crime, Carolina Denhard, shares the studio with me, and together we bring you this program every week. Unfortunately, Carolina was unable to make it this week, and she has left me to fly solo, which I'm trying my best to do, and hopefully not failing miserably. But once again, I want to welcome into the studio Stanley Louissaint from Fluid Designs. Hi, Stanley.
What's going on?
I'm glad you hung around. He only hung around because we blocked the door, wouldn't let him get out in between. But Stanley and his company specialize in information technology. They do web hosting, web design, server setup, all sorts of fun stuff like that. But the better part, and the whole reason why Stanley's here today, is as a result of Stanley's work in computer forensics. And that is a growing field and something that Stanley has been in, how many years now?
Forensic side, actually 7 or 8. Yeah.
So you've been involved in computer forensics probably since its infancy. Yeah. And that's why we asked you to come on the show, and I do thank you for coming in. Stanley, let me ask you a question. Let me open the segment saying you've been doing this for a while now. What were some of the accreditations or training that you had to get in order to do this? So
one of the cool things is, so I've been in the computer field, IT, the whole 9 yards, for about 19 years now. I actually went to NJIT, got a degree in computer science major, which the courts recognize as being equivalent to any of the certifications on the computer forensic side. So what's interesting with that is, I mean, everything, right? We're down to the programming. You talk about ones and zeros before. Yeah. Believe
1
me.
0 1 1 0 0 1.
Yeah, don't remind me. So
I think I just told the dirty joke.
So in terms of that, I didn't necessarily need to go the path that a lot of the other guys have gone. Of course, do training and all that with the different software vendors and packages that we utilize, because there's different things for everything. But in terms of having to, hey, I used to be a law enforcement officer and I went and got this certification. Now I'm a computer forensics guy. You
didn't need any of that.
Didn't need that.
So with your degree and your on-the-job training and your experience and your history, you've been rolling through the computer forensics world.
Correct.
And it is a very interesting world. I have to say that the bit that we have used, people like Stanley, has been eye-opening. And I had asked you to, when we ended the break, I'd asked you to come back in and give us your craziest story. But before we do that, I'm going to give you a funny one. About 5 years ago, I had a case where a long-term marriage, and the husband, who was a doctor, decided that he was going to go off and had his second midlife crisis. His wife, who was my client, was a wonderful woman, a grandma, a special ed teacher, played with kids basically during the day, and this gentleman would go off to various Far East countries, and he'd go off to France, and he'd go off all supposedly alone. During the course of the case, we came upon a discovery that it seemed that he had somebody he was seeing. And he denied it and denied it and denied it. And we did, as we talked about the first go-around, we did a little search once we found out her name. We did a search on Facebook. I found out this person existed. They were not friends together, or that we could tell anyway. But what we noticed was that she, coincidentally, was going on a lot of these vacations. Coincidentally, at the same time that he was going. And what we did in order to help let this gentleman know that we knew what he was up to, was we had a computer forensics guy go in, and he created a report. And the report basically was a number of screenshots, all from the public domain, of so-and-so was at the Eiffel Tower. And then 2 hours later, a picture from her in front of the Eiffel Tower, which on some of them, he would like or he would comment. And we put together this nice little report, what is it called? Love Bridge or Love Lock Bridge out in, all these various places.
That's a nice place,
though. Long story short, when I handed the report to his lawyer, he takes a quick flip through it, and it was professionally done. It was all color pictures. It looked very nice. Excuse me a second. He goes off into the other room. He comes back. He says, without talking about admission or not admission, what is it that you're actually looking for? I said, very simple. I want back the money that he blew on taking this woman on all these trips. I'll be right back. Goes back, comes back with a number on a piece of paper. This is what he's willing to offer you as a result. Went to my client. Sure enough, she looks at it. She says, I could live with that. And we settled that aspect of the case. So that's the type of work that computer forensics can help in our field of divorce law, because like I said in the first go-round, the first segment, why the marriage fails doesn't matter. When it does matter is when it's impacting the economic circumstances of the family. So when a spouse, and we generally are sexist on this show, and we'll say it's the guy, when the guy is off spending marital savings on a significant other, the aggrieved spouse is entitled to a credit. And that's the only aspect of it really that the court matters and the court really cares about, except, again, as we spoke about in the first segment briefly, domestic violence, where we have issues of harassment, we have issues of stalking. We didn't talk about digital stalking, which is something that is under the Domestic Violence Act, is a cause of action and a reason for which somebody can get a restraining order on the basis of stalking. But before we go into that, give us a story, Stanley.
So the craziest case was actually one of my first cases, right? Always the case, right?
So we're working off of like Commodore 64s and
no. So I get brought into this case because someone is mentioning negative things about this guy, right? When you were talking about reputation online,
right.
You put his name into Google, and the first thing you saw was this guy's doing this, he's doing that, he's a pedophile. I mean, like the craziest stuff that, anyone ever wants to see. So the attorney brought us in, and they really wanted us to just try to flush this out, right? Who's doing this?
Flush this out or flush this out? Did they want you to get rid of it, or they wanted to find out who was doing it?
No. Flush it out in terms of who's doing it.
Okay.
And let me tell you why. One of the things that we didn't talk about in terms of the internet is, the ability to pretend that you're someone that you're not online, right?
Spoofing.
Right?
Spoofing.
Exactly. So what ended up happening was I ended up uncovering a web of about 8 different aliases, we'll call them, online aliases, and about 45 different individual blog pages that all talked about this guy negatively. Okay? And it was just insane because the content, I mean, they had went through a divorce, or even probably while they were going through the divorce.
Right.
Some of the content that was on the blog was literally scans of some of the discovery documents that only, one of 2 people would have, right? It would either be him or his now ex-wife, right? So it was just wild in terms of, from our perspective, in terms of just what was out there.
So as you're going through this investigation, you're saying, oh my God, there's 8 people sitting in a room, smoking cigarettes and eating fast food, all writing about this poor guy.
Correct.
That's at least the thought as you're going through.
Correct. And as things progressed, as we went on into the investigation, like you said, searching the ex-wife's Facebook page, what was public there, the different groups or associations that she was attached to in that public space, and some of the commentary that was being put out there between them. It was just so much stuff. So not only was there stuff in this, we don't know who these 8 people are, right? Space, but then there was stuff that she was actually putting up as herself.
Unabashedly, I'm my son, my ex is a son of a gun, he's an SOB, he's blah, 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 blah.
Correct. This is how I feel about him. There's nothing positive about this guy. And this is how it is. So it was interesting. The battle at the end of the day was parents versus, the children, right? The children were at the middle of this whole thing.
It was a custody battle, basically.
Correct. So, who feels that somebody has a right versus who feels that someone doesn't have a right to this kids. So, like I said, what ended up happening is I literally used everything that you would use in my world in this case. So I found out all these blogs, right, that were using one of these blog platforms that they had. So subpoenaed those guys and ended up getting, the connection logs of who connected to those blog sites when these posts were made.
In other words, who was creating them?
Correct. Then Facebook. So some of those aliases were also on Facebook. So subpoenaed Facebook. Now, one big thing around the subpoenas, guys, just so everybody knows, if you're not asking for content, most of the time I'm going to get what I'm looking for. If I'm asking for content like, hey, what did Stanley send John? They're going to ignore you.
But they will be able to tell the connections that occurred at the time.
Correct, right?
And by the way, Stanley, I'm going to interrupt only to say, you're saying subpoenas. So that means that everything that was being done, everything that you were doing was done at the request of the attorney who had retained you and was all sanctioned by the court.
Correct, because this actually turned into a criminal matter. So the courts were signing off and giving us everything that we wanted. In terms of that, hey, we were looking for this, and they'd sign the documents and they'd send the request out. Go ahead. So, so everybody was involved in this, right, on many different levels. So what ended up happening was, and just so you know, when you do, let's say a subpoena comes in for somebody trying to get your Facebook page, okay? Facebook's actually going to contact you and you have a right to kind of say no, or get your own counsel. Well, when you're using made up stuff, that notification is going to go unannounced.
Some random.
Yeah, right? Because you're not in there all the time and you don't pay. So guess what? So things just kind of got handed over. But literally and by the way, I'm sorry I didn't mention this in the beginning. When we talk about digital footprint, that goes back to what we call the famous IP address, right? Which you've heard that term. Any
Internet Protocol address.
Exactly. Any device that you have that goes on the internet is assigned an Internet Protocol address. Now, there's an internal one, right? But then that's not the one we're concerned about. We're concerned about for the most part, the external one. Because what that is, that's going to tie it back to your service. That's going to tie it back to your Sprint cell phone. That's going to tie it to your Comcast service at the house, everything like that. Those guys all keep logs of which IP address is assigned to which modem, whose house the modem is at, and everything can stem from that.
I'm beginning to see how this story plays out. So I'm beginning to put the puzzle pieces in.
So what ends up happening is I literally have this wealth of information. And in terms of time, like I said, this is 2.5 years, that we kind of go through this whole thing. So I have this wealth of information, And I put together I remember the attorneys to date still like, Stan, how did you draw this web, right? And essentially everything pointed, let's just say this.
To 123 Fake Street.
Yeah, right? And actually we had a hearing, which was the craziest thing I ever seen. Because when at the hearing, it was like, well, who did it? Because one thing is, I can't say who did it, right? I can just say it's at the house. And if the house has 5 occupants, then it could be one of 5 occupants, right? It's not necessarily one person in the house. So, we tied all back, by the way, tie back to the cell phone. Oh, yep, your cell phone was one of the 80 cell phones that had access to this particular IP address on this date and time. Your home, your home modem, yep, had that IP address when this thing was posted. I mean, it couldn't have been any more beneficial from my standpoint of like success from my world.
Right.
And it was just like straight denial, right?
So basically you guys, with your attorney, you came up with the assertion or the case theory that one person, one spouse, was the persona of all 8 people and was effectively single-handedly responsible for trying to slander this gentleman.
Correct.
Wow.
Correct. And I mean, my thing is the time, the dedicate. I mean, first of all,
they never left the house.
I mean,
I wonder why it was always that IP address. If you're trying to do all that work.
No, that's the thing, right? I mean, you have that many different personas, right? That many different logins, email addresses, right? Different email addresses. It was just insane. Different Facebook profiles, aside from the regular one. I mean, it was, from my standpoint, I was like, the hatred has to be real deep, right? For you to get to that point.
So if I were to ask you what ultimately happened?
The case in itself kind of fizzled out, but as a result, if I'm right, I don't think he's got the relationship with his kids that he wants. So, which, in a way, maybe that's all it was really about, just getting somebody out the picture, which, I haven't done a ton of matrimonial stuff, but unfortunately,
you will, trust me.
Unfortunately, I've heard that, it's not an uncommon thing that, certain allegations come about, after a divorce proceeding happens, unfortunately.
Let's shift gears a little bit and let's talk about the computer forensics work that you could be called into and that you would be called into play in an active divorce case. So, for example, I call you up and say, Stanley, we have an issue of dissipation of assets. One spouse has been spending money like it's water. We have gotten a court order that gives us his computer. It's at my office. Come on over.
Okay, so first step in any forensics matter, we get in a forensics image of the machine.
So you actually copy digitally what the drive is.
Yes, and let's clarify copy. You can copy and paste on a computer, right? You take a document, you put on a flash drive. It is not that. It is literally going to take the drive out, going to hook it up to our equipment, and literally going to do what we call a sector by sector copy, which is the drive as it is. Empty space, blank space, it doesn't matter.
So it'll copy all of the data, which for the uninitiated would mean that if there was data that had been there that was, for example, deleted or overwritten, it would copy the fact that that data had been there and had been overwritten.
Would copy the sector where that data was. Now, mind you, if the data has been overwritten, it's overwritten. I mean, that's just what it is.
Right.
Doesn't mean that there's not a reference to it, right? Or some artifact, I like to call them, right? We call them artifacts. Some little piece behind that. Oh, look, this was here, Doesn't mean that. But, so that's the thing. That's the first step. And what that does is, and by the way, it doesn't modify, nothing gets modified, okay? Everything is as it is as the day that you got it at your office, as long as you didn't turn it on. And we get that. So now from that point forward, what ends up happening from my standpoint is then I go into analysis mode. So First I have to image capture, right? That's phase 1. Phase 2 here, you can give the person back their computer, right? We don't need it anymore. They can destroy it. They can do whatever they need to do because now we have the forensics image, which we're going to work off of. Then we go from that point into analysis mode, which, right, web browsing, what websites did you go to? Now I work And this is sometimes the struggle for all of us, right? What are we looking for?
Right. That's the question.
Right.
If you sit there and say, I know there's something here. Well, okay, thanks, genius. What?
Yeah, like the case I told you, early on, right? Which was, hey, we were looking for text messages, right? So we knew, we kind of knew where to focus the attention. Because that's kind of how it can sprawl out of control, is if we don't know what we're looking for. So I'm going to ask you, give me some keywords, right? Give me something. Like you said, bank statements, financials, they use Bank of America, right? They use Merrill Lynch, right? Certain things to try to help focus in our efforts. So, because mind you, depending on the size of the drive, right, we can be sitting here looking at it all day if we don't know what we're looking for.
Right. But
if we have an idea, then we can start going into that direction. But a lot of times it could be web browsing history, right? It could be like, look at the websites these guys went to, right? Look, he was on sex.com buying toys, and his wife didn't get the toys, right? I don't know, right? It could be something.
1-800-Flowers on some random day.
Or wait, he was on Ashley Madison. We saw that he was logged in, right? So there's all kinds of artifacts, right, that we can start looking for, and to try to find and piece the story together. I kind of have that theory when I'm doing an investigation, to let the evidence take me where it takes me. We find what we find, and hopefully it's of use to everybody. But, and that
probably not of very much use to the person whose drive you're searching, but that's beside the point.
Yeah, well, as long as the computer doesn't end up, missing, because we've had that happen.
My phone dropped in the toilet and now it's unrecoverable, or the 18-wheeler ran over it.
Yeah, I don't know where it is. I lost it.
I think that's what we call fatal hardware error.
Yeah.
But you were talking about searching web browsing.
Mm-hmm.
Question. When you go to Google Chrome and there's the private browsing, the guy with the little detective hat and the sunglasses, is it a misnomer or is it accurate?
It's accurate to a point. What it does is it doesn't save. So it keeps it in memory and it doesn't save stuff. So you log into Facebook, you log into LinkedIn, it actually does throw things away. But most people aren't doing that work every single time. And it's just like, the way cops look for criminals, right? You're really looking for the one slip up, right? Do I really need 30 pages worth of information to prove the point? Or
ran into Ashley Madison every 2 hours.
Yeah, right? So, what you're saying is an extra step. It's extra work. Even when you look at cyber hackers that get caught, right? The one time the guy forgot to put the VPN on, right? He gets caught, So what you're really looking for is that one slip up. And most people always leave something behind. You want to talk about data. We do IP theft, right? Where somebody leaves a company, go into another one, and usually a few days before they leave, that's when they stick flash drives in the computer and start copying files, and we see things are being opened. So a lot of that stuff happens. And like I said, you have to really be extremely diligent, and I'm not going to say we can catch everybody, because some people are that diligent, right? It just exists. I never make a guarantee that I'm going to find what you're looking for. But you got to be perfect every time, to not have the misstep.
That's one of the old sayings when it comes to criminals and police work, and this, we catch as many as we can because most of them are stupid.
Yeah.
And that's, I guess it translates to your field of work as well, because when you're doing the computer forensics, you're looking for that slip up. And unless somebody has a sheet of paper taped to their, before I do this, make sure you take steps 1 through 7. And then when I'm done, take steps 8 through 12, they're eventually going to slip up. And that's when you
Correct.
get them.
Well, and you're saying in terms of, if here's an example, in the case of the iPhone, right? Like you said, you hit delete. Like, hey, I hit delete all the text messages, right? Like, what do you mean? What do you mean Stan can still pull them back, right?
Right.
So, sometimes you do what you're supposed to do, but it's not up to you. It could be a problem in the software. Let's say Google Chrome has a slip up in that incognito window where there was a programming glitch where, they just didn't code something properly, right? Well, you're part of it'll be part of your downfall. So it just happens.
That's pretty interesting. So when we talk about forensic work on hard drives, and you were talking during the first segment relative to going back and getting data for text messages off of a phone. I assume, since our phones these days are just mini computers, that's the same type of work you can do with a regular cell phone. If they have stuff mapped into a cloud or a iCloud or iBook or something or another, all of that, as long as you have do you need the access code? Do you need authority? What do you need?
So everything is different now, right? More so than ever. So
is there proliferation of Apple or just technology in general?
You know what it is? And this debate, people get into it. I understand the big companies' perspective, right? Because they get inundated with requests on giving information. Like no one's reimbursing them for doing all this work, right? And they got to have teams, to do it. So
we saw in the news a few months ago when the federal government was going after Apple to give the government a
backdoor
passcode or a backdoor into somebody's cell phone, that and Apple said no.
They don't have it.
They didn't have it, or they wouldn't give it. And ultimately, from what I remember, they seem to have got in anyway through the help of an outside technology firm from another country. And that I remember when it was in the news, it was a big deal because people were saying, to what extent does the government, as Big Brother, have the ability to come to a company that is on the shores of the United States and say, help us, or we demand that you help us? And at what point in time are the civil liberties of the users being infringed?
Correct. So I'm fully with, if there's a backdoor, then it's not secure. I mean, it's true. I don't care what you say. You can't tell me that everybody who works at the Gov is going to be there forever or is a perfect employee or is never going to be upset. NSA hacking tools just got leaked out, which the big infection you saw with 200,000 computers worldwide was because someone got the NSA hacking tools, found those vulnerabilities that they were exploiting, that they didn't tell Microsoft there was a hole. They were literally using it to their advantage. And now the public sphere essentially got that information, and somebody wreaked havoc on, you saw the hospitals in the UK and in Europe and all that. So at the same time, I understand it. So from my perspective, you get authorization to get a phone, right? I need three things. I need the PIN code to the phone, if there's one that exists.
Right.
I need the iCloud password because I like to see if there's any backups up there, all right, that we can pull down. And Apple now has a code on your phone where you encrypt your backups locally. So that's a third password. So it's really three passwords to be able to do what I need to do. Now, and just to just wrap up on this, it's not a sector by sector like on the computer.
Right.
We call that a physical acquisition. You can't do that anymore. Now it's called logical. You're just getting the files. Right. So it's different on it. Cell phone world is different than the computer world, but in theory, they're the same.
Stanley, before we wrap up, I do want to give you the opportunity to let our listeners know how they can find you, where they can get in touch with you for their regular IT work as well as computer forensics. So go ahead. All
right. So we're located right in Union, New Jersey. You can find us online at fluiddesigns.com, FLUIDDESIGNS. You can find me on LinkedIn, Stanley Louissaint, LOUISSAINT. You can call 908-688-2444. The easiest man in America to find. Put me in Google, you'll find me there.
Is that always a good thing? A bad thing? Well, you'll have to wait till the next show to find out.
I only put the good stuff there,
And I, on behalf of Carolina Denhard and myself, David Tawil from the law firm of Bud Larner in Short Hills, New Jersey, both Carolina, who unfortunately could not be here tonight, and I are counsel to the firm. We practice exclusively in matrimonial and family law, and we can be reached at 973-379-4800, or again, like Stanley, on Facebook, LinkedIn, etc. So until next time.